and welcome to my channel. My name is Stephanie Lafergie. I am a realtor here in the beautiful, sunny Okanagan, and today we are diving deep into market reports. We're going to be covering the July market and whether you're considering selling or buying or looking to buy. Maybe you're just curious about this beautiful community. This report will give you the insights that you need. We'll cover the latest market trends, neighborhood highlights, and expert tips to help you make informed decisions. Let's start with discussing the current market conditions in Kelowna. I'm going to be reading this news article. You can pause it and read it yourself if you don't want to listen to my voice, but I think it does a great job summarizing what we've seen so far this month of July. We saw a total of 362 homes of all kinds, single family, townhouse, and condominium sold in Kelowna. A modest jump from the 342 sales in June. Prices also reacted with the July benchmark selling price of a typical single family home at $1,025,200, up a bit from June's $1,009,200. The July benchmark for a typical townhouse was $779,200, up fairly significantly from $717,000 in June. And for condos, the July benchmark was $493,800, a minuscule, oh my gosh, how do you say that word? Minuscule bump from the $400,000 $89,300 it was at in June. For the most part, both sales and prices are a little softer than they were a year ago. And the new benchmark prices are still off the record highs of over 2 years ago when the single family benchmark was $1,131,000, a townhouse was $829,000, and a condo was $557,700. Now, one thing that's really important to note was we had a rate cut in July, which is likely why we had that subtle increase in prices in the benchmark price. Because as we know, as interest rates come down, there's usually a little bit of a bump in buyer interest, and sellers take note and slightly raise their prices because of that adjustment in interest rates. Inflation today is at 2.5%, which is the lowest it's been since March of 2021. And we are going to be having another policy update in September 4th. So there could be another interest rate adjustment happening, which could mean another slight bump in prices once we come into the fall. Let's look at market trends. The average days on market gone up since the summer. So we're seeing more inventory, more days on market, and we are certainly shifting into what we would call a buyer's market. I would say the average days on market in the Central Okanagan is around 60 days, depending on the product you're selling. It's going to be different for townhomes, condos, and single family homes. Now, when we look at the sold to list price ratio, normally in a seller's market, you would see a roughly 100% sold to list price ratio, but in a buyer's market, we are typically selling under list price. And in the month of July, we were selling about 3% below list price. This is for 1,500 listings, basically all the solds, covers last year, and you can kind of see how the market goes from spring, winter, summer. It usually peaks around May. If we look at the absorption rate is essentially the months of inventory. When we see 7 months of inventory, we're in a buyer's market. And when we see 3 months or less of inventory, we're in a seller's market. Depending on your neighborhood, it can really range. There are certain neighborhoods that have a really high turnover, and they are actually in a balanced market right now. So as far as inventory goes, when we look at the entire Okanagan for the month of July, we are at about 8 months of inventory. So we are just starting to really shift into that buyer's market. And again, I really want to stress that this can vary based on what neighborhood you're in. There are some neighborhoods that are in more of a balanced market and are still having a lot of activity. Listings are selling. and they're just desirable neighborhoods. Those are an exception, and you're going to really want your realtor to do a proper analysis of that neighborhood and areas that you're close to if you're planning on selling your property. But if we're talking in a general sense, I would say that it's definitely a buyer's market. This absorption rate is showing that in the summer's months, we had a little bit more activity in the market, and now it's dropped off as we head into the fall. Although I am predicting that we are going to get an uptick in sales activity in the fall if we do get a rate cut. Let's discuss some economic factors that are affecting these numbers. We know that the provincial government has made it really difficult for us to have short term rentals. So, tourism is down. We're not getting as many tourists coming up to Kelowna. And I cannot tell you the amount of times tourists actually look at real estate while they're up here. It's a great way for people to see whether they like Kelowna, get a feel of what the prices are like while they're on vacation here. Now, with less Airbnb rentals, there's less places to stay. And that also affects businesses and overall economic productivity. So, buyers are hesitant. Prices are remaining fairly stable. They've come down a bit, but they haven't come down enough to meet buyers' expectations. So we're not getting as much activity on the market as we would like. There's also the capital gains tax that is affecting sellers wanting to sell their secondary properties as well. Even so, that hasn't really stopped inventory. We are seeing a ton of inventory on the market, and buyers are being picky, as they should be. This is a huge purchase for them, and sellers are ending up in that no man's land zone. And what I mean by that is they're not pricing their properties in a competitive way to really capture and keep buyers' interest. So it's really important for sellers, in order to actually have a sale, to be ahead of that perceived market value. Let's talk about price trends. Prices have come down, as we know. They've come down by about 4.2% since last year, at least for the benchmark, and days to sell has increased, which is no surprise. When we see higher inventory, we see often higher days on market because there's more competition. So at the moment, the average days to sell, at least for July, was about 51 days in the Central Okanagan. Townhomes have actually gone up a bit in benchmark price compared to last year. Days to sell has gone down slightly for the month of July. So we're seeing a little bit more activity in townhouses, but inventory is up. So it'll be interesting to see what next month looks like. Condo sales prices are definitely coming down. We're down 5% compared to last year. Benchmark has also come down. Our benchmark for condos in the Central Okanagan is around 493,000. Days to sell has increased. There's a ton of condos on the market, and that has also been affected by the Airbnb laws. A lot of people are having to sell their investment properties. I think we'll also see a lot of new condos for sale because people, when interest rates were low, may have purchased one or two because the completion dates were different. But now with the new Airbnb restrictions, unfortunately, it's really tough to carry that amount of equity and not have any cash flow without any rental guests. So I think we're going to see some brand new condos on the market as well. At a glance, why don't we look at where we're seeing the most volume in terms of real estate transactions? I would definitely say that's downtown Kelowna, like Sunset Drive. And we're seeing a lot of activity in the Lower Mission and Rutland, and even the city of Vernon is getting more activity. But we're not talking about the North Okanagan today. We are just talking about the Central Okanagan. Another place that is gaining more activity is the east of Lake Country, so the Oyama area, and that's also where prices are a bit lower, more affordable, so we're seeing more buyers activity there. This is a graph of listings. We are at almost 3,500 listings in the Central Okanagan as of July. Way more inventory than we've seen in a while. So buyers are being incredibly picky. The buyer demand does not even come close to the amount of listings we have, which is bringing prices down. So I think we are still going to see prices come down a bit. Now, as far as the amount of homes being sold in terms of price range, we're seeing way more activity in that $1 million plus range, which isn't too surprising because when you're in that luxury market, people don't necessarily care as much about interest rates. Maybe they're coming from a city where sold their house for a lot more and they're able to buy those homes at a cash value. So, actually, when I pulled this data, I was pleasantly surprised that we're seeing so much more activity in the million plus range compared to the other home ranges. Because personally, I feel like that four to $800,000 range is the one that's moving the most, the has lesser days on market. And you can even see on the graph that second to the $1 million range is the four to $500,000 range, which is right in that condo townhouse sweet spot. Let's take a quick look at our average sales to list price ratio. I already covered this a bit, but I thought it's kind of nice to see in a line graph and based on the month over the last year. According to this graph, sales are selling about 5% below the actual list price. So, depending on where you're getting your data from, whether it be the MLS or some statistics platform, it's not always going to be 100%, but I would agree with this that it's at least 3 to 5% below list price, if not more. We've seen some really big price drops over the summer. In terms of actual units selling, we saw the most activity in May and it dropped off in June. We saw a little uptick in July, which makes sense because we had that rate cut. And that's expected. As soon as you have a cut in rates, there's a slight increase in buyers' activity because they want to capitalize on that. However, if you are a buyer watching this, I really want to emphasize that if there is a rate adjustment in your near future, so like for example, September 4th is just around the corner, there may or may not be a rate cut. But let's say you've bought a house and your closing is 3 months out. Remember, you can always negotiate your rate again before closing. You just have to ask. So make sure if you're a buyer, you've already purchased a home and you're about to close and you're going to be closing around that interest rate adjustment mark, let's say there is a rate cut, you should still be able to negotiate your interest rate, assuming you haven't signed off on everything already. But honestly, like I've seen it at the very last minute, they will adjust it because they want you to be a happy customer. Now, moving on to the average price for homes sold in July. If you look across the entire Central Okanagan, the average price was around $738,000. I don't really love averages because the Okanagan is so non-homogeneous. There's so many different types of properties here, even in terms of residential. There's large parcels of land, there's small subdivisions, there's all sorts of different houses. Now, this next graph is going to start to seem pretty obvious, and that is the list price compared to sold price. Pricing is down. Listings are selling for about 5% below list price. So this graph just verifies that. So far, we've covered sold to list prices. We've gone over days on market. We've gone over the neighborhoods that are having the most amount of action. And as for the forecast, predicting the future, I don't like doing that. But I do feel like that we could see a rate cut in September because inflation is starting to come down and we'll likely see an uptick in buyer activity. And I think prices are also starting to come down. People are going to start taking their homes off the market as we approach fall and relisting in the spring. And with less competition, I also think we're going to see a little bit more activity in the market. So if you are thinking of buying or listing in the Okanagan, please contact us. We are the Move Okanagan Group. My name is Stephanie Lafergie. And if you like this market report, it would absolutely make my day if you dropped a little like, or even left me a comment if you'd like me to cover specific neighborhoods. I would love to hear about that. We do tend to specialize in Vernon, Kelowna, and Lake Country, and I would just love to hear your thoughts. I'm always an open book. Call me, email me. I would love to help make your real estate dreams come true.